Yogurt was invented 7,000 years ago in Mesopotamia and Central Asia. That's before written language. How did they make it without recipes? They just had to vibe, see if it tasted good. Or made them ill, I suppose. You're always rolling the dice when it comes to fermented dairy products, that's what I always say. But then again, when it's just you and the goats out there in the Zagros Mountains on a hot summer's day, sometimes you just gotta let the magic happen. And by magic, I mean yogurt. So there's this slightly infamous animation that got certain corners of the internet all in a tizzy when it came out a few years ago. Dozens of articles, commentaries, Reddit posts, even a few YouTube videos blossomed throughout the web trying to explain the virality of this 90-second artistic frolic. Some rejoiced in its hopeful vision of our future, bestowing upon it the coveted moniker of Solarpunk. But others said it was basically just co-opted corporate marketing designed to insidiously defang the potential of that which it tries to depict. All this chattering and intercoursing got me particularly hot and bothered when I discovered it 2 years later. So naturally I had to go on a 9-month philosophical odyssey into the nature and impact of commercially successful art and the audience's role in defining its meaning. Okay, I'm gonna play you this animation in a sec, but first, I want to prime you for what you're about to witness. Let your mind be open. Take a deep breath with me. And just keep an eye out for anything strange. Anything that seems out of place.
Dear Alice, this place is yours now. It's a handful, but nothing worth doing is easy. The land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it will feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay come rain or shine. And remember, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. Our job is to plant seeds so our grandkids get to enjoy the fruit. So, eat well, Alice, and keep planting those seeds. Because how we eat today feeds tomorrow.
It's subtle, but eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed a bit of product placement in this otherwise chill communist video. It's strange, jarring perhaps, that in a world of expansive green space and conspicuous lack of billboard advertising, the only branded things in the entire world are Chobani single-use plastics. And it seems several other people have noticed this slight incongruity. The theme of this video is so disconnected from the branding, it's wild. In this universe, people would absolutely not be eating and drinking out of single-use Chobani cups and cartons, LMAO. The advertisement looks like gore in art like this. All that hope in this little evil megacorp in the middle of it all. The irony of a Solarpunk ad for a corporate company. I do love anti-capitalist, capitalist ads. I can't believe this is an advertisement for yogurt. I wish this was a show. Bold of them to assume a Solarpunk future includes capitalist brands, lol. Still, the animation is beautiful. The internet has ruined me. I can't look at something so beautiful and not expect some kind of trap. The Solarpunk vibes here are real and inspiring. I can't believe they pulled this off for a yogurt commercial. This is exactly the kind of commercial you'd see an evil corporation doing in a dystopian cyberpunk setting. Black Mirror episode vibe. Yeah, it seems like something bad is gonna happen, whether it's bots or from skyscrapers. It's so funny that one of the most well-visualized examples of an eco-socialist Solarpunk utopia is in a commercial for a disposable cup yogurt company. Consume more of our product contained in single-use plastic to save the planet. Don't you want your grandkids to to live in paradise? Consume! Buy! I hope you realize production exists in every form of economic system, or do you want to start? You know that back before we used single-use plastic bottles, we would actually reuse and return glass ones. Back when we got milk delivered by the milkman, we used to leave old milk bottles out for them to collect and reuse. On top of that, if the glass ever breaks, it can be infinitely melted down and reused. Even recyclable plastics can only be melted down once or twice. Things really went downhill after the 60s when... Did y'all catch that this was a Chobani ad? Watch it again and keep an eye out for product placement. They're even commercializing hope. Jesus fucking Christ. I want to ask why this ad exists, what it's doing, and whether it worked. It's a story that spans from an animation studio in East London to a yogurt mogul from East Turkey. We'll meet a full house of philosophers and perhaps a pair of cyberpunk sisters. I want to ask if we can take art created under capitalism and use it for something revolutionary, and whether we can make our own. The Oxford English Dictionary defines solarpunk as
Solarpunk, one of my favorite fusions of art and politics. Solarpunk is everything from a positive imagining of our collective futures to actually creating it. It derives its name from the cyberpunk genre and all the other punks it has spawned. There's even now punk, which is set today. Solarpunk is a shining vision of a positive future, grounded in our existing world that emphasizes the need for environmental sustainability, self-governance, and social justice. It's a movement dedicated to human-centric and eco-centric ends. It looks beyond the limitations of capitalism and beyond the current rift between humanity and nature. It's a futurism that focuses on what we should hope for rather than on what we should avoid. Solarpunk recognizes that climate change, the consequences of centuries of damage, aren't averted in the future, yet it still manages to incorporate hope. A future where we've got a lot of work to do, but we're doing better. Using technology for more uplifting ends, like seed bombing drones and solar ovens. Solarpunk emphasizes real-world application. It's all about what we do here and now, from DIY projects to larger organization. Solarpunk is also very aesthetic, as I'm sure you've realized. It uses a lot of nature motifs and takes inspiration from Art Nouveau, upcycling, and Asian and African styles and artistic movements.
Our solarpunk ad, or Dear Alice as the animation studio calls it, captured the attention of several online niches when it came out in July of 2021. This ran the usual gamut from press releases to reaction content to analysis of the video itself. Though when I say analysis, I am in some cases being generous, like this one from Looper. Lastly, the decommodification of the Dear Alice commercial from Chobani drives everything else home. The solarpunk messaging would have been lost if it was a straightforward ad to sell yogurt. However, the commercialization aspect doesn't really factor here. Chobani products are featured throughout the ad, but attention isn't directed toward them. Well, I hate to say this, Mike Bedard, but much of the internet disagrees with you. In fact, the third most popular search after Dear Alice is Dear Alice decommodified, which would seem to imply that most people do not consider the original ad to be itself decommodified already. And if indeed you search for the decommodified version, Ecosia will show you dozens of results of people requesting and sharing versions of the ad with all of the logos and voiceover removed. In fact, this one comes up before the original ad in my search results. That is probably due to my obsession with this ad, but that's beside the point. Also, since I started this project, there's apparently like a K-pop band named Dear Alice. No relation. Dear Alice has achieved such quintessential status in the solarpunk subculture that it has its own TV tropes page. If you've seen any solarpunk content online, you've probably seen clips from it. When you start typing solarpunk into YouTube, the third result after music and game is yogurt commercial. The Solarpunk subreddit increased from 44,000 to 63,000 in the months following its release and is now going strong at 147,000 at time of recording. At one point I saw a video that was just like a 3-hour loop of it to vibe out to, but now I can't find any trace of it, so maybe I dreamed it or it got copyright claimed. So we all love the vibes of this Chobani ad. So much so that people have taken pains to remove all signs of Chobani from it. So why? What draws us to this world? Why does it not feel like a commercial? So what is this ad trying to evoke? Seems obvious. Utopia, right? It's evoking the sense of a better world. But how? How's it doing that? Well, to answer this question, we're going to use the concept of intertextuality, which is a coined term by Bulgarian-French philosopher Julia Kristeva. See, I was a little bit unsure how to pronounce her name, given Bulgarian emphasis or French vowels, etc. So anyway, Julia Kristeva said, if you already watch video essays or any contemporary media really, you already know what intertextuality is, even if you wouldn't use that term. Intertextuality is a mosaic of quotations. Any text is the absorption and transformation of another. The notion of intertextuality replaces that of intersubjectivity. Okay, yes, I realize in defining one term we have in fact introduced another term, but don't worry about intersubjectivity for now. It's a concept from psychoanalysis which refers to the way that someone gains access to another person's inner world. Intertextuality, on the other hand, what the fuck is this? Intertextuality, on the other hand, says that a better way to understand how humans make meaning is by considering texts themselves as the fundamental unit of interpretation, not an individual's understanding, biases, subjectivity, but an individual's knowledge, implicit or explicit, of other texts and their relations to one another. Basically, we understand art, movies, literature, media, even our daily lives through references to other works that we're already familiar with. Hi, buddy. Sometimes this is really explicit, like parody or homage, and sometimes it's subtler, but most of the time it's not even conscious, especially in internet culture, where memes get reproduced and modified so many times that they are making meaning quite divorced from their original texts. Intertextual reference can be done skillfully.
Freaky ass nigga, he a 69 god.
It's a song that represents the West Coast and gets back at Drake for using AI Snoop and Tupac, with a Draco the Ruler, Remble, E40 type flow.
All these chains on my neck, I need toe hammers, nigga.
A hi-fi Northern California mustard beat, and many direct references to Pac and his legacy.
It's all eyes on me and I'ma send it up the pot.
Or less skillfully.
You're tearing me apart!
What?
Like when I was little, my dad was kind of a movie buff. I wouldn't call him a cinephile or anything, but, we watched a lot of movies together, which he would constantly quote. Monty Python, Runaway Jury, Clear and Present Danger, The Hunt for Red October. And he liked weird movies too. Y'all know The Saint, right? Y'all know The Saint? Classic 1992 Val Kilmer film starring Elizabeth Shue, in which she plays a nuclear physicist who has discovered the secret to cold fusion. Val Kilmer has to dress up in all these different disguises, naming himself after various Catholic saints, and seduce her into stealing the formula for cold fusion because he's an international thief and he's trying to sell it to the Russians, and the Russians are ruled by a populist oil baron, espionage, and, warming one another with your naked bodies to overcome hypothermia. It's an iconic film. I quote it all the time. Anyway, to get back on track, you could say we all have a sort of intertextual understanding of our lives. Then you're getting into fundamental ideas about human identity, the meaning of stories, narrative therapy, all sorts of things. But for now, let's just stick with intertextuality in the context of understanding individual texts in relation to one another. So, can we really apply this academic theory of intertextuality to ads? Well, that's the wrong page. Intertextuality has been appropriated and adapted by non-literary forms so that it is not, despite the embedded word text, exclusively related to works of literature or other written texts, including virtual texts, says Elaine Martin in the Comparatist Literary Journal in 2011, which I take to mean I'm allowed to use it to talk about yogurt ads. Arguably, ads would be nigh incomprehensible without intertextuality. They only make sense because they are referencing something that exists outside of the ad. Think of the old Mac versus PC ads.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC.
Oh, hey, PC, want to see the website and home movie I made?
Oh, I'm so creative, and all my programs are so easy to use.
They only really made sense because they were referencing existing cultural archetypes that existed in the zeitgeist. On one hand, the square, schlubby white guy, and on the other hand, the cool, floppy-haired hipster white guy. And implicitly, we were of the understanding that we were supposed to identify with the second white guy. So, it's not just that they're listing out technical specs or describing user experiences, but because we have these emotional ties to the archetypes that they're working with, we know exactly what the ad is trying to communicate. But then you can get into even more advanced cases, like where the PC guy is delivering these my fellow Americans kind of speeches and delivering these out-of-touch pronouncements about how it's not the system that's broken, you're just not trying hard enough to make it work.
If your printer isn't compatible with Vista, I say, buy a new printer. If Mac's new Leopard operating system has dozens of new features, I say, ignore them. Ask not what Vista can do for you, ask what you can buy for Vista.
Wow, you're really committed to this.
Oh, not really. I switched back to XP 3 weeks ago. So much happier.
And here Apple is associating themselves in opposition to the dominant political class, which is very funny considering the current techno-feudal serfdom we all slave under. Serfdom. Gosh, remember when we used to surf the internet? But you get the idea. Ads are short, so it would be inefficient not to stuff them with intertextual references. They have to elicit an emotional reaction from the audience, preferably unconsciously, by making them think of something they already have emotional investment in. So, what references are making meaning in Dear Alice? Well, there's a lot. So, you know what? Actually, let's just do a lightning round and point at things we like. Rustic water wheel surrounded by plants hooked up to an unobtrusive hydroelectric battery. Stream surrounded by plants flows through another water gauge. A handful of cows hang out in the shade behind solar panels. A woman's kitchen is filled with drying flowers, living plants, fruits, freshly baked food, some sort of drink in canning jars, mismatched furniture, hydroponic watering system for plants, data tracking perhaps their soil moisture or some other health metric for the plants, an outdoor terrace, which appears to be either readouts about the plants or perhaps AC in the house. Robot machines are doing backbreaking farm labor while human checks them. Multi-generational kinship implied. Community plus POC woman. Her bicycle isn't locked up. They've got an old person wearing a prosthetic leg as a background character, picking berries. Is this good or bad? I honestly can't tell. They've got bisexual representation at the table. This lady seems like she's wearing noise-canceling headphones, or maybe some sort of hearing aid, which is always nice to see, you know, accessibility-wise. I like that this kid has a pencil, like a regular-ass pencil, because those are useful for writing on stuff. I think we got some gays or possibly brothers in the background. That dog appears to have a prosthetic front leg. This thing that appears to monitor how ripe your fruit is? It's a grandmother speaking to her granddaughter so that she has sweet intergenerational thing going. Okay, so we see all these disparate elements coming together to form a picture of utopia. Let's think of a word to call all of these little pieces of the ad that point us toward the direction of utopia. We'll call them signifiers of utopia. I was looking for some nice bucolic springtime music to go in this section, but instead discovered this ballet by Igor Stravinsky, which apparently incited a riot when he tried to put it on in 1910's Paris, which then led me through another commenter to this opera, which apparently sparked the powder keg of the Belgian Revolution. So let that be a lesson to all of us about the power of art. So bringing back intertextuality, we can see all of these individual references as common to movies or media depicting optimistic futures. Whether it's automation everywhere, large swaths of green farmland, flying cars, or robots as labor-saving devices. Let's put a pin in that idea. But then we've also got things which are not commonly optimistically coded in futures, like weather control.
Imagine being able to
bring light and warmth to the darkest parts of the world. Imagine being able to grow crops the year round, bringing an end to hunger. Imagine a second sun, shining like a diamond in the sky. Let there be light.
Or, again, robots, which have a slightly ambivalent relationship to humans on film. So we have all of these signifiers swimming around in the cultural zeitgeist. How do we pull them all together and make commercial art? How do we make commercial art that touches people? Dear Alice was developed for Chobani by the Line Animation Studio, who posted the spot to their YouTube channel in June of 2021. A channel whose most popular video at time of recording is from 9 years ago and entitled Saoirse Bit My Finger. Which we can agree is comedic gold, but I had a burning question. Where were all their other animations? Why aren't they on YouTube? Who is this mysterious line? Well, it turns out there's a simple answer to this. They are a firm specializing in commercial animation work, and many of their animations end up posted to the various branded YouTube channels of their clients. So when a video takes you more than 2 years to actually finish, some of the mysteries that you set up at the time no longer correspond with reality. So, the Line has now uploaded many videos to their own YouTube channel. Also, as somebody who has been staring at the Line's work for several years straight now, I have to just tell y'all that you guys have the sickest website that I have ever seen, and it's not close. I see you also have a quote from Guillermo del Toro, who calls your work bellissimo, which I would absolutely agree with. I'll also say I so deeply appreciate that y'all have a bunch of concept art for many of your projects. It makes it so much easier to research video essays like mine, so thank you for making this incredible website and all the awesome work you do. Yes, that's all. Thank you. Their biggest client by far, at least by the number of projects the Line has done for them, is Riot Games, especially League of Legends. They've made ads for Blizzard, Riot, Marvel, Supergiant, Gucci, Acura, BBC's Channel 4, and also a bunch of smaller projects from decentralized anime on the blockchain to tea. Sometimes they collaborate with specific artists for campaigns, like originator of the Gorillaz album art, Jamie Hewlett, or in the case of our dearest Alice, concept artist Jessica Wolf, who published this piece as an entry for the Adam Hawk Solarpunk contest back in 2019. And it's this aesthetic they would take and run with on the Solarpunk yogurt ad over the next couple of years. Just to give you a taste of the Line's other work, I would sum up the theme of their engagements generally as too good for the product they're advertising. Except in the case of their spot for the Mercedes Maybach, which I would sum up as eat the rich. They definitely deserve it. From my analysis, I was able to determine that a large majority of the Line's projects are directed by co-founder of the studio, Erik Ashim. Boy, I gotta look that one up.
Erik Ashim.
Erik Ashim. Other fun facts I discovered about the Line is that their animator run, which is a big deal. I'm particularly interested in the feature-length film they've got in development based on this short by a co-founder of the studio, Wesley Lewis. Sort of anime-inspired mecha robot X young British Caribbean kid coming-of-age story, inspired by his own background growing up in London and hearing about the culture his parents were from. I also think it's worth taking a foray into a few of the concept artists brought on for Dear Alice. I'm not a visual artist, so I'll try to keep my commentary to a minimum here, but I'll just highlight what I saw in their work. I've already mentioned concept and background artist Jessica Wolf, and clearly Studio Ghibli is a strong influence on her work, and put a pin in that, we'll be coming back to Studio Ghibli. It's also easy to see the correspondence between Wolf's The Future is Bright entry and Dear Alice itself. The year is 2060. The government subsidizes farmers to allow wind turbines to fly above their farms, while still allowing use of the land for crops and livestock. This scene depicts a generations-old, traditional Norwegian farmhouse, with the farmer and his daughter going about life on the farm. While he represents the past and tradition, his daughter represents the future. She is wearing white, he is wearing traditional farmer's clothing. This story moment represents tradition accepting the future, holding hands with the next generation. So we can see that it's not just the visual design of Dear Alice that was inspired by Jessica Wolf, but also this core concept of an intergenerational farming story with an eye toward the future. Next, there's comic book and layout artist, animator, and set designer Camille Proutin. And then, VizDev concept artist and ceramicist Chiara Benedetti, who has top billing for concept art in Dear Alice, and you can clearly see the correspondence with many of her early sketches. Interestingly, I would say her public portfolio largely skews a bit darker and more abstract than the rest of Dear Alice, so that's fun to see. And finally, concept artist and illustrator Camille Slew, who did a full series of Ghibli-style art studies. As well as this perhaps aesthetically solarpunk piece, along with the cover for what I would say is a pretty clearly solarpunk game. Now, commercially successful animators and artists like these are going to be extremely well-versed in cultural signifiers and intertextuality, even if they wouldn't use those terms necessarily. In the production details of Dear Alice, they say, it's not a perfect utopia, but a version of the future we can all reach if we just decide to put in the work. So, we can see the set of signifiers that they brought together as quite intentionally optimistic, but also somewhat ambivalent about what they depict in this future. Okay, so I've mentioned it several times already, it's unmissable in the ad, so let's talk about the intertextuality with Studio Ghibli. If you're not already familiar with Studio Ghibli, what are you doing? Studio Ghibli is a Japanese animation studio that was founded in 1985 by directors Hayao Miyazaki, Isao Takahata, and producer Toshio Suzuki. Now, they've made some of the most beloved and critically acclaimed animated films of all time, including the household names My Neighbors the Yamadas, Ocean Waves, and who could forget? Hey, buddy, come here. Quark is kissing the stand for the, what do you call that? Tripod. He's trying to, oh, he is. The cat returns. He's not returning. All right. Where was I? Okay, so we know Ghibli. Let's see if we can figure out some of the specific texts that Dear Alice may be referencing. These comparisons not to say, oh my god, what a ripoff. Clearly, Ghibli inspired is what they were going for. We saw that in the concept art. And it comes through loud and clear in the final product. And speaking of loud and clear, let's take a listen to that music, shall we? It's got that sparse nostalgia with a hint of sadness. Well, in fact, it is legendary Studio Ghibli composer Joe Hisaishi who did the music for this ad, which is like crazy, actually. I mean, I guess he's a commercial musician. That's right. The music for this ad was composed by legendary Studio Ghibli composer Joe Hisaishi. And in fact, I've listened to this ad so many times at this point that his music just starts playing in my head as soon as I watch it, regardless of whether the sound is on or not. But I'm not going to do a deep dive into Hisaishi's music for the moment because, well, while I am a great appreciator and lover and player of music, I am still dabbling in composing. But I want you to know more things than me. So, for that reason, I recommend that you watch Nare Soul's video on this topic. Now, what matters for you and me at this moment in time is that Joe Hisaishi has worked hand in hand with artistic director of Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki, for 11 out of the 24 Studio Ghibli films, starting with Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind in 1984, Castle in the Sky. I want to be able to just rattle off this list, but I have not memorized it. I'll just read it. Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, 1984. Castle in the Sky, 1986. My Neighbor Totoro, 1988. Kiki's Delivery Service in 1989. Ooh, next is something in 1997. Princess Mononoke, excellent film. Spirited Away in 2001. Howl's Moving Castle in 2004, my personal favorite. Ponyo 2008, Wind Rises 2013, and The Boy and the Heron Up to Date 2023. And the thematic resonance between Studio Ghibli and Dear Alice is more than just aesthetic. A lot of Studio Ghibli films deal with intergenerational stories, parents and children, children dealing with the adult world, spiritual journeys, a lot of things to do with nature and humans' relationship to it. We'll say in Ghibli films, typically the relationships between generations tend to be depicted as a bit more fraught, mated with contradictions.
Lynn?
What? Dad, guess what? I've decided to leave tonight.
You're going away?
Yeah, there's a full moon.
Well, yeah, but what happened to the camping trip we were supposed to take this weekend?
Sorry, Dad.
Kiki, wait,
Don't worry, okay? Daddy is going to make sure you get vengeance. I will catch whoever did this to you.
Mated, that doesn't sound right. Filled with contradictions. Perhaps there's another word I'm missing. Anyway, the relationship depicted in Dear Alice is pretty just straightforwardly positive, which, I mean, who can blame them? It's like a minute-long commercial. They don't have 2 hours to explore the intergenerational trauma of war, so that's, I mean, I'm not going to fault them for that. And as for other things that we might question about this ad, well, let's talk about it. Hey, stranger. Yeah. You mind if I take a second? Yeah, take your time. Just shut the door behind you. Bam. That's so you got this. 180. The kettle's hot. No, I'm okay. Let's just get into it. I got some strong feelings about this one. Alright, sit yourself. In that case, why don't we give this thing a watch together? And, excuse me, Kira. You can tell me about these strong feelings of yours. So, thoughts? Look, it's straight up techno-optimism. It's the same as these Silicon Valley bros keep peddling. Like, they alone are gonna be the saviors of the world because they're just gonna innovate us out of the 6th mass extinction event on this planet. You know, 40% of the surface of this planet has been converted to monoculture. That's the reason for 90% of the deforestation. I don't know, this looks like monoculture to me. Well, but not all of it is monoculture. I mean, I think, yeah, here it looks like there's different crops in the same field. It's hardly a food forest. Are you sure? Have you ever been to a food forest? Okay, maybe some of it is mixing agriculture. This looks pretty close to me. But my main point is, it's still techno-optimism. Like, if we just insert enough little gadgets in between our streams to measure how much water's flowing through, measure how efficient our orange crop yield is, robots to pick our oranges. It's colonialist high modernism, just to make the line go up. Okay, maybe inserting a bunch of tech in between ourselves and the natural environment is not the best way, I grant, to cultivate a reciprocal relationship with land and place, but I mean, come on, are you just rejecting the use of technology to mitigate climate change outright? I mean, there's so many different technologies that could help with restoration.
But look, what about this whole thing of getting a drone to deliver a single grocery item? That's exactly the kind of individualistic startup bullshit that both hasn't worked and would never make sense in an actual farm community.
No, I totally grant that getting a drone to deliver a gallon of milk to a farm is by far the dumbest part of the ad. But I mean, can't we grant that as a concession to the fact that this is a yogurt commercial? I mean, there's a commercial artist, they have to make money somehow. You can't just refuse to do what your client asks.
But your whole argument is based on trying to make this ad into something radical. You can't just ignore the flying cars and
I haven't mentioned the flying cars yet. I was getting to them.
I was going to say flying cars and geoengineering. Geoengineering! The height of colonial hubris.
Okay, but what if doing that could protect people from a famine?
This is an artificial scenario. We know the most devastating famines in history are caused by the state exerting unilateral control over the food systems. And yeah, sometimes pushing technology, because it's part of some great march forward, a civilizing mission, like how Europe fucked up the food systems in Africa. Famines are caused by social systems, or by colonial governments intentionally trying to weaken the population.
Yeah, except when they're caused by extreme weather events.
Yeah, okay, sure. Maybe there's some far-flung possibility that cloud seeding would be a justifiable thing to do if otherwise a lot of people would starve. I still think that is a distraction of a technology when there's already so many problems that we could solve right now with the technology we have, just by distributing things more equitably.
Yeah, I guess I agree.
But you still don't think this is techno-optimism? With the flying cars.
Flying cars, come on, it's obviously a cat bus.
The flying robots then. The readouts everywhere, the smart home features.
Smart home features. Really? What is colonial about this? What about this do you not like?
I'm not against all technology. I like the idea of blending green stuff, tech, and sustainability. I like Solarpunk, in theory. It's just this whole world that they're depicting, it's gonna make people think that, oh, the Silicon Valley bros have got it covered, better just sit back and wait for them to figure out carbon capture.
Look, honestly, I don't think the problem right now is that people have too much faith in technology.
Okay, so what's it gonna take to get people off their asses and do something about it? I've been reading US labor history, right? Back in the 1910s, they'd get a couple 100,000 people out in the streets, like that, fighting with the cops on the picket line.
But 2020, there was something like 20 million people out in the streets for the George Floyd uprisings. That's still the biggest mass movement in US history. That's not nothing.
Yeah, okay, but that's not labor. What was the last mass action that really brought the economy to a standstill?
Oh, you must not know about the Indian general strike.
What, like Native people?
Not American Indian, from the Indian subcontinent of Asia. 250 million people went on strike.
During the independence movement?
Nope. 2020.
250 million?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
How do you even... How did they even organize something like that?
They make connections.
But here... we're so atomized and techno-fascism is ruling everything and I don't...
I know. They say
Fascism is imperialism turned inward, right? Well, indigenous people have been resisting that shit for centuries. About time we started learning from them. I mean, we're talking bringing languages back from extinction, keeping cultures alive under insane oppression. And honestly, I think whatever we do next has to be informed by indigenous philosophy if we're gonna make it into the next century. So how is this techno-infused future supposed to help? I mean, science and progress have been deployed over and over again for centuries to exploit people and land and water. Indigenous ways of knowing and Western science aren't mutually exclusive. Figuring out how to combine them kind of has to be the path forward, doesn't it? Western patriarchal ways of doing science suck in a lot of ways. But I mean, the practice of some variation on the scientific method has given us so many incredible things. I mean, we could save people who would have died just a few years ago. We can bring species back from extinction. We can contact anyone around the world. People who built that stuff are definitely not engaging with indigenous thought. No. But you are. Right, it's so important that I, as a white techie, is engaging with indigenous thought. I am such an individually good person. Hey, Rin. We both know indigenous philosophy better than that. We aren't separate from the world, from people, the land, the living, the non-living. And also, I wasn't done listing cool science stuff. I was going to say cheap solar cells, mobility devices, HRT, mesh networks. I mean, come on. But who am I supposed to talk to about this? Tech and STEM are full of people educated to think of their work as completely apolitical, even as it is used to subjugate, maim, and otherwise colonize people around the world. Have you tried talking to your community about this? Well, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm not the most... I don't connect that well with people, with normal people, okay? So you're telling me you're weird, you're a weirdo, like you don't fit in, you don't want to fit. Stop it. No, I mean, whenever I try to get into this stuff with people, I start talking deep shit, politics, philosophy. They just don't engage. They'll walk away and change the subject, and so I just don't engage. I'm whatever the situation needs me to be, okay? Have you considered that you may be neurodivergent? That doesn't help me. Look, I don't believe in pathologizing human behavior. No, of course not. It's just, maybe if you thought of yourself loosely that way, then maybe you could meet other people who also loosely fall into that bucket, and I don't know, maybe it would be easier to connect with them. Look, I've seen their content online. It's just a bunch of people justifying their neuroses to each other and complaining about things. Do you know what masking is? I'm just saying, maybe if you spent more time with non-masking neurodivergent people, you would start to see that it's okay to say things that don't land with everyone, and maybe you could show up as yourself, regardless of the outcome. And, okay, I know I'm speculating here, but maybe then someone else could feel comfortable showing up as themselves, also regardless of the outcome. Look, do you think you might meet more people who think like you do, if you did?
We interrupt your regularly scheduled program for this special public service announcement. automation has long been touted as the key to human freedom from toil. Recently, we have seen a critical re-examination of this sort of prediction, in particular one by John Maynard Keynes, the most influential economist of the 20th century. Keynes very much thought technology, alongside government regulation, would bring us ample leisure time, with the famous prediction in 1930 that we would be working 15 hours a week by the year 2030. 100 years prior to this prediction, Charles Babbage, prominent scientific thinker, designer of an early computer prototype which he never built, and notorious hater of street music,
it not infrequently gives rise to a dance by little ragged urchins,
had this to say on the effect of increasing mechanization. One circumstance which has produced this economy in the manufacture is that the lathe on which these knobs are finished is now turned by a steam engine, so that the workman, relieved from that labour, can make them 20 times as fast as he did formerly. A similar example from father of capitalism, Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. However, even Daddy Capitalism expressed pointed concern for the division of labor facilitated by the mechanization in the very same 1776 tome. The man whose whole life is spent in performing a few simple operations has no occasion to exert his understanding or to exercise his invention. He naturally loses, therefore, the habit of such exertion, and generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Naturally, labourers whose lifelong crafts were trades were being superannuated by such developments engaged in ongoing debate in the free marketplace of ideas. The true effect of the Industrial Revolution was summarized quite succinctly at its close by the classical liberal economist and philosopher John Stuart Mill. It is questionable if all the mechanical inventions yet have lightened the day's toil of any human being. I think a guy from Germany also wrote something about labor and mechanization, but I don't remember his name. Prominent science fiction of the late Industrial Revolution was similarly concerned with technology's effect on humanity, the price of progress, such as Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley's Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, published in 1818 and considered to be the first modern science fiction novel. She carried the spark of radical inquiry from her mother, early feminist political philosopher Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and her father, one of the first anarchist political philosophers, William Godwin. During the mid-1900s, revolution was in the air. 1848 saw liberal anti-monarchy revolutions catching fire in more than 50 nations around Europe, alongside the publication of a little-known tract known as the Communist Manifesto. Screaming into the late 1800s was the Gilded Age, depressions and domination by the likes of robber barons like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Widespread dissatisfaction with the status quo was pumping through the zeitgeist, and in response there came an efflorescence of utopian socialist fiction, including Edward Bellamy's novel Looking Backward, Gloriana, or The Revolution of 1900, by Lady Florence Dixie, William Morris's News from Nowhere, and Begum Rokeya Sakhawat Hossein's Sultana's Dream, 1905, a provocative proto-feminist social satire created by Begum Rokeya, who would go on to found a school for girls in 1915, which still exists today. In 1920, Czech playwright Karel Čapek put on his play R.U.R., or Rossum's Universal Robots, which is both the first appearance of the word robot, meaning forced labor in Czech, and also the first depiction of robots as indistinguishable from humans, deciding to kill all humans and take over the world, scooping the Terminator and Battlestar Galactica by 66 and 84 years respectively. Isaac Asimov's robot novels in the 1940s through 1995 became cultural touchstones of what became known as retrofuturism over the latter half of the century, with their presence becoming such a staple of the genre it need not even be justified. Sadly, even after centuries of depiction, debate, and direct action, as most of us can attest, given that we are all still required to work to live, exploitative labor continues very much in parallel with automation. Cute robot dogs or no. And now, back to your regularly scheduled program.
Look, all I'm saying is if we're in a future that includes capitalism, which is all I can surmise given the existence of a separate donations bin, the peach-picking robot probably breaks constantly and needs a full-time farm worker on it to fix it or just do its job when it breaks. And honestly, humans are much cheaper than machines. They don't require maintenance or anything. If one breaks, you can just drop ship a few new ones and exploit their fear of deportation to keep them from unionizing.
Okay, that's pretty dark. But to be totally fair to the ad, though, it does look like there's a person there to check the robot's outputs. Look, I don't want to get too dark talking about farm worker abuses, but hey, buddy. I mean, you make a good point about the donations bin. In a way, it's kind of insidious, actually, that in this, like, hopeful future, you still need food donated.
That's what I'm saying. And don't even get me started on the voiceover.
Oh, good point. We haven't even started on the voiceover yet.
No, wow, please don't make me do this. It's so cringe.
Yeah, you read it.
Fine, give it here. Dear Alice, this place is yours now. It's a handful, but nothing worth doing is easy. The land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it'll feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay. Come rain or shine, and remember, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. Our job is to plant seeds so our grandkids get to enjoy the fruit. So eat well, Alice, and keep planting those seeds, because how we eat today feeds tomorrow. There, you happy?
Thank you, my dear. I know it was hard for you. I just needed your inflection.
But let me say, I appreciate the gesture at land acknowledgement. I mean, the land is more than just dirt, you know. If you take care of it, it'll feed you forever. It's a little bit of reciprocity in there. I also like that line that's like, we're planting seeds for future generations to bear the fruit. That kind of reminded me of this indigenous idea of 7-generation thinking, which I think originates in the Haudenosaunee Confederation and their Great Law of Peace, which, fun fact, I recently learned inspired key aspects of the U.S. Constitution for whatever that's worth. Anyway, it's a nice gesture. Yeah, it's a nice gesture. But can we talk about the obviously whack aspects of this? I mean, a business is only as good as its people. What does that mean? Is she talking about her customers, her family? Who are these people? What kind of economic system is this? To treat your family well, that's the key to business success? But she points at the robot when she says that, so what is the robot people? Are they sentient?
I don't know.
No, wait, I forgot. The full line is, a business is only as good as its people, so treat them well. You know, the golden rule.
Alright. But I mean, what's the alternative? Just treat their employees badly?
No, but it's about framing.
Yeah, alright.
Okay, maybe this one's a nitpick, but there's something about that line, you're a smart one. It's right after this, the land is more than just dirt. If you look after it, it'll feed you forever. You're a smart one. I know you'll be okay. I don't know, it's ever since I learned the links between IQ and eugenics, Nazi shit, it's hard for me to hear someone's intelligence used as justification for them being worthy of land, you know? Especially since there was all those justifications of stealing native people's land because, they were just ignorant savages. They didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, there's something a little odd about that line. But I mean, to give them the benefit of the doubt, I imagine they were going for, emphasizing women's capabilities for rationality and intelligence, which is so often denigrated. Women are just emotional and mysterious.
It's a nuanced area. That which is unknowable and mysterious may be a target of violence. But to insist on militant rationalism and positivism ends up reinforcing patriarchal values. Where was I?
You were complaining about the voiceover.
Oh, right. So this whole thing ends with this really odd phrase.
how we eat today feeds tomorrow. And I mean, why wouldn't you say what we plant today feeds tomorrow, or what we grow today feeds tomorrow? But it's a yogurt ad, so I guess we have to make it about consumerism, so we end up with how we eat today feeds tomorrow, which seems like a really bizarre piece of advice to give your granddaughter as she embarks on taking over the family farm.
When I grow up, and I said I never liked the ones that is greedy or the rich or whatever you call it. How do I build a place where I don't become a person that I grow up hating?
This is Hamdi Ulukaya, a man who has been a billionaire since the early 2010s. Dear Alice, or as Chobani marketing likes to call it, eat today, feed tomorrow, which is of course also the tagline for the 2019 reboot of Soylent Green. This ad of ours today is the brainchild of Hamdi Ulukaya's business philosophy to merge capitalism and humanitarianism into a delicious or a synergistic pie. Now, before we go any further, I must warn you what this commenter discovered. I was trying to write an essay about this ad and corporate adoption of utopia, but it turns out Chobani is about as ethical as you can get short of becoming a co-op, which is nice, but my essay's fucked. But I've been trying to embody a certain amount of cis white man level of confidence in my own ideas lately, so onward. Now this is a little section I like to call Manufacturing Consent for Billionaires. So the media absolutely loves this man, which immediately sets off my alarm bells. Implicit in this gushingly positive wave of coverage is the idea that this billionaire is good, actually. And not only is he good, his being a billionaire is good for the world. Let's take a look at a few headlines in particular. Why Chobani's CEO gave away millions. On Tuesday, Hamdi Ulukaya, founder and CEO of Chobani, the Greek yogurt giant, gave his employees 10% of the company. Each worker received a packet with a share grant commensurate with their tenure at the company. The gift came directly from the CEO. Okay, so implicit in this title is the idea that giving away 1/10 of a company's profits to that company's employees one time, 9 years ago, constitutes giving away millions. And it's hard to think of a more perfect example of the problem with philanthropy, because if you stop to think about it for a moment, where did he get all of that profit to be able to give it back to people? Or part of it back to people, shall we say? Why wasn't it already owned by the workers who made it, and why only 10%? Chobani is certainly not unique in this. All capitalist firms work this way. If you cost the company more than the profit that you make, you'll be fired. By definition, you cannot be fairly compensated for your work. Unless you work at a worker co-op or something, in which case, hello. Now let's talk about Hamdi's Wikipedia page. It approaches hagiography. It's many breathless recitations of his honorary degrees and many humanitarian causes, awards for humanitarian entrepreneurship. It's enough to make my American heart swell for this American dream come true, a penniless immigrant who pulled himself up by his bootstraps to build an empire of yogurt, making billions of dollars a year. Hamdi's page also makes mention of his pledge to give away half his wealth, which was highly covered, of course, by the news media. And although the original article linking it is broken, I managed to find absolutely no follow-up whatsoever, that he did anything of the sort, which is oddly common among these sorts of pledges. It's almost like there's no actual follow-up or enforcement or accountability for any of these sorts of things. So even Wikipedia seems skeptical. And I could go on a
whole tangent about Wikipedia talk pages, but I don't want to bore you with all of that, so.
Actually, let's take a second and talk about Wikipedia talk pages. So if you're my age, when you were a kid, your teachers probably told you you can't trust Wikipedia because anybody can edit it. Now that's true if you're gonna use any fact that you found on Wikipedia in like a serious setting, go find the primary source. But if you're a frequent Wikipedia rabbit holer like myself, you will have started to notice that articles vary a lot in quality, tone, level of detail, and you might start to notice these little flags that'll say things like fact disputed, non-neutral tone, or of course the now ubiquitous citation needed. Well, if you ever want to experience the psychodrama of a bunch of mostly anonymous pedantic nerds attempting to arrive at the consensus truth in an age of disputed facts, but you don't want to subject yourself to Reddit, I highly recommend taking a gander at a Wikipedia talk page. So I'll spare you the gory details and just say that Hamdi's talk page includes at least 3 employees paid by Chobani to edit their own CEO's Wikipedia page, among what I imagine are the manifold other duties of a brand voice. And this is where the rubber of manufacturing consent really meets the road. For reference, most Wikipedia editors are just random volunteers and not people getting paid to write purportedly neutral content about their own employers. So, naturally, these volunteers flagged the content that was created by such people as, biased. But Stephanie at Chobani was determined to get that non-neutral tone flag removed. So determined that she asked someone else to make the edits for her. User Paradise Chronicle thanks Stephanie for her suggestions, but points out that it's pretty weird to ask someone else to make the edits that she is literally getting paid to make for her boss. They suggest Stephanie make the edits herself to try to get the article back into a neutral state. Remember, they say, Wiki isn't for PR. But don't worry, the brand voice says. I will be sure to make only edits I'm 100% sure are not promotional. And that was 2 years ago, and it still has a neutrality disputed flag on the article, so I'm not sure she ever got the message.
Look, just to be abundantly clear, I don't have beef with this guy. I mean, based on his very well put together media kit, he seems pretty ethical. For a billionaire on the Department of Homeland Security Advisory Council, that is. So I teased you earlier with a 2022 clip of Hamdi on a Harvard Business Review podcast called The New World of Work. And I actually recommend going and watching the full interview yourself, because I think even with everything that I'm about to criticize about it, you'll probably have a hard time coming away with that without feeling at least a little bit positively toward this guy. And I think that's really interesting, because I'm against billionaires controlling the world, but there's just something about this guy. I mean, he's so charming. It's really difficult to come away from it without feeling like, man, that guy, he would be cool to get a beer with. But I think it's a really good exercise to try to remain critical in situations like this. So let's listen to Hamdi weave his humanitarian capitalism message and see if we can spot what the moving pieces are inside of it.
So Hamdi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adi. Good to be with you.
I know you think a lot about relations with employees. You say that Chobani is an employee-first company. What does that mean to you?
I come from, like you said, rural part of Turkey. I don't come from rich or, well-off type of areas. We come from the villagers and factory workers, working class. And there's a disconnect. Of course, this struggle has been all around the world, but there's a disconnect when it comes to wealth, when it comes to access to even state resources.
So he starts by, well, I don't even think I'm reaching that far here, invoking class struggle? So where does he go with this? He's introduced the factory worker in opposition to the state across international borders. It's the same where he grew up and in upstate New York.
And you come set in upstate New York, and you see the same thing, right? The factory gets closed. The company make a decision in, I don't know, wherever, the Chicago and in a tower, and the community is left behind and workers are to blame for.
So where does he go with this? What is his solution?
You look at the people's living expenses in that community and you make your own math and say, this minimum wage is not going to work, so we have to be certain level of the income, basic income. And can they have the insurance and benefits just as mine? Whatever I use, they have the same. These are the basic ones. The later on you say, how come factory workers don't get parental leave? The moms and dads. You realize that 99% of the manufacturing work in this country does not offer. Companies don't offer. At least at that time, I don't know what it is. Still very high.
So we start with gestures toward international class solidarity.
Factory workers, working class. Of course, this struggle has been all around the world, but there's a disconnect.
And we end with employees should have the same benefits as their CEO.
And can they have the insurance and benefits just as mine?
Not the same pay, but the same benefits, which is a much smaller concession. So how is he getting away with that? Because it still functions rhetorically as if he is providing a solution to the original problem that he brought up. Well, it's a little technique called anchoring.
So if you are in upstate New York or in Idaho or somewhere else, you look at 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, a typical factory workers will work a minimum wage, probably not much benefits. The common things like parental leaves or family type of resources, none of those would be available.
So he starts by setting the baseline at these other bad factories that do not provide their employees parental leave. It's a little technique called anchoring. And I have a book that I can show you. Where is my book? Oh, there it is. Whoop, don't fall. This is a very carefully posed bookshelf. Okay, this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, won the Nobel Prize in Economics a while back, defines anchoring. Well, rather, I'll read you an example. All right, I'm going to read an economist now. Don't say it, leftists never listen to, the mainstream. There's useful information here. For real, though, I do actually need to give a huge disclaimer here. So I first read Thinking Fast and Slow when I was maybe 14, and at the time I found it just incredibly impactful. It's all about cognitive biases and tricks humans use to try to solve complicated problems. And I had been raised in a Christian Zionist household, so the fact that a huge number of Kahneman's insights were gained from his time as a psychologist for the IDF didn't strike me as noteworthy at the time. Now, as an adult writing a video essay, having done a hell of a lot of deprogramming and education about the history of Palestine, this is absolutely glaring in Kahneman's work. Though I must say not in the section I was using for this essay, which is why I didn't catch it earlier. I really struggled on whether to leave this section in the video once I had all of these realizations, but I still think it's valuable to learn from people with whom we do not share values. And his work is the foundation of the entire field of behavioral economics. He won the Nobel Prize, for goodness sake, so I think it's worth understanding his work. So he describes anchoring with this example. If you are asked whether Gandhi was more than 114 years old when he died, you will end up with a much higher estimate of his age at death than you would if the anchoring question referred to death at 35. If you consider how much you should pay for a house, you'll be influenced by the asking price. The same house will appear more valuable if its listing price is high than if it is low, even if you're determined to resist the influence of this number. And so on. The list of anchoring effects is endless. So often, anchoring will be used to describe numbers, right? You are given some quantity that you're trying to estimate, and you hear an unrelated number, and your brain subconsciously will use that unrelated number to try to anchor your estimate. The way I'm talking about anchoring here is that if we want to try to estimate an answer to this problem of international class struggle, then, we might posit something like a general strike. But that's not where Hamdi is starting, of course. Obviously, he's a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. So instead, he is going to anchor on something that is more achievable. So he starts by setting the baseline at these other bad factories that do not provide their employees parental leave.
A typical factory workers will work at minimum wage, probably not much benefits.
Which, yeah, that sucks that they don't provide them parental leave. But, you know, it's anchoring the possible answers to this question. So, let's continue. And that's not to dismiss the value of concessions like this, like parental leave benefits. Labor unions fight for this kind of thing all the time. And in fact, speaking of labor unions, here's a letter from a labor union asking Hamdi to respect the rights of his workers and suppliers to unionize. You can also see the myth-making around Hamdi really evolve from when he first starts getting a lot of coverage around 2011. Here you got an article entitled Chobani, the Unlikely King of Yogurt. It says he started a feta cheese company based on his father's advice after moving to America and taking a few business courses at SUNY. Very reasonable. He invokes the unspoken business language or instincts that go back thousands of years. We call it Anatolian business practice. Your reputation is your asset. Now, fast forward to Harvard Business Review 2022, baby. And he's all...
You said, I've never done this before. I've never worked anywhere. I've never studied business.
Not to mention the fact that it was, in fact, the second cheese company that he had started. So, you know, it tells a better story if you just leave out those details. So, of course, news articles do, and Wikipedia articles do. Next, Hamdi talks about being under-resourced.
In that old factory, it is still unbelievable what we've done in that old factory. That was one small filler, 4 people, 70, 80 years old. No one even knew that it could be turned back on. We end up making sales almost close to $1 billion in that factory without raising a 1 penny of capital. And that is just not possible in any dimension that you look at it. But it only happened because people just found a way. We just found a way.
We all know that life, you know, finds a way. But in my experience, when our people always find a way is used in a business context, it tends to mean something more along the lines of, we create a sense of urgency tinged with religious guilt in order to justify constant crunch time. But of course, your mileage may vary with that. I mean, I wasn't there in 2005 in South Edmundston, so perhaps it was different. And Hamdi likes to call Chobani a startup without outside investors and invokes a lot of very strong American ideas about businesses and entrepreneurs succeeding. He says, it's still unbelievable what we've done in that old factory for workers. No one knew it could still be turned on. It was previously owned by Kraft Foods, by the way. And we made $1 billion without raising 1 penny of capital, except for the, you know, business loans that he got from the US government, but, you know, not raising any capital. Not possible in any dimension, but it happened because people just found a way. And it's difficult as an American not to hear that and have your heart swell. Honestly, and I mean this genuinely, like, listening to him talk about this, I'm like, wow, that's so beautiful. You know, he came to this country and got everything moving. He had nothing to start off with, and then now look at him. But thankfully, a Swede is here to break us out of our reverie and circle back to the original question that Hamdi was supposed to be answering.
Here. So this is Ulrika from Stockholm. So she says, you know, I get that people are your biggest asset, but what is it that you're doing that other leaders aren't? That are making, you know, people number one and that have an effect on the company.
So he starts talking about setting salaries based on living standards, giving away 10% of his profits, as we talked about before. And actually, let's circle back to that one about giving away 10% of the profits, because the media does frame this like a thoughtful boyfriend showing up at your doorstep with a dozen roses. I mean,
Chobani Yogurt Company is giving back to its employees in a very big way. 2,000 full-time workers were handed shares in the upstate company today. Its owner, a Turkish immigrant who started it all 10 years ago, says it's his way of awarding loyalty.
But, okay, let's read the fine print here. The estimates of money going to the employees is entirely speculative. These shares are based on Chobani's valuation. And if you know anything about company valuations, you may know that value and valuation are not equal. So, Then Hamdi describes a panoply of other things that he does to make his employees' lives better. All nice things, nothing wrong with that. But he ends by saying,
these are the steps that you can take, fundamentally in the floor.
These are the sorts of things you can do, and fundamentally,
these
are the sorts of things that you can do. Again, he's anchoring there. You can't imagine something outside of what he has proposed as ways to make people number one.
These are the steps that you can take.
So, he ends by saying it doesn't end there.
That doesn't end there. Of course, it's endless.
But of course, it does seem to end at actually paying employees what they're worth. Anyhow, Hamdi then segues into talking about refugees, which I think is the most ideologically interesting part of the interview. And ideology, as our patron saint Abigail Thorne says, is more about the notes you don't play. So what is Hamdi Ulukaya not playing in this interview? So at this point, the interviewer asks, what is Chobani's response to the refugee crisis? How can they help?
When I started Tent, I actually started because I saw what happened when people had a job after their settlement at Chobani and how it changed their life. It was just simple. When we started hiring refugees, we didn't hire them because it was a refugee work. We hired them because they were people in the community, and we were growing, and we were hiring everyone, and they were in the community, and we hired them. And the reason that they couldn't get a job, but the refugee settlement agency would say, oh, they don't speak the language, they don't have cars, they don't have the trainings, which for us or for anyone, these are very small obstacles to overcome. You can rent buses, you can hire translators, you can do the job training at work.
Hamdi says some genuinely good stuff about investing in communities long term, about refugees being integrated into the community and being able to overcome language barriers and transportation barriers. But despite how much of this hour-long interview is spent talking about refugees, talking about Hamdi going and visiting camps, going to different countries in the world, he never once mentions why there are so many refugees.
So another border, right? Another border from Ukraine to Poland. You have close to 5 million people just left, displaced within weeks. But this is not the first time I see it. I saw it in Colombia and Venezuelan border. You go through the bridge and flow of people. You see it in the Jordan and Syrian border, or Jordan and Lebanon border, or Turkey border, or you see people go from Myanmar to Bangladesh. The suffering, the general picture is the same.
He never once mentions why there are so many refugees. In fact, he doesn't even want to consider them refugees. He says, the minute a refugee gets a job is the minute they stop being a refugee, which is very interesting because employment is the delineator here. You can be a sad refugee leaving your home country, fleeing with all of your possessions left behind, but the moment you have a job, gosh, who cares about all that, stuff about where you came from? You're going to be an American. You're going to assimilate now, right? Hamdi believes that the business community is absent from the biggest humanitarian issues facing the age. Therefore, he proposes the Tent Partnership. Now, what is the Tent Partnership? Well, let me tell you. It is this.
I thought if I could bring a business community into this with the motion of hiring, training, and using their supply chain, wherever they are in the world, to support refugees, we could have another dimension, even getting closer to solving this, or at least start the way. So I started Tent in 2016, Tent Partnership for Refugees.
Hamdi is trying to convince you that the solutions to problems caused by global capitalism, colonialism, neoliberalism, I know it's a lot of isms, but bear with me. He's trying to convince you that the solution to capitalism is more capitalism. It's honestly quite straightforward.
I saw what happened when people had a job after their settlement at Chobani and how it changed their life. It was just simple.
There's about 1,000 resources that I could recommend if you're interested in learning more about any of those isms, but I think my favorite right now has definitely got to be the 2024 documentary Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which is about the absolutely buck-wild phenomenon where the United States used to send around black jazz musicians to different parts of the world as ambassadors to essentially try to make the Soviet Union look bad, while those same people were living under Jim Crow laws
in the United States at home. So they are literally sending like Louis Armstrong, Nina Simone to Africa to promote American values. But under cover of one such Louis Armstrong concert, the CIA just has the prime minister of the Congo kidnapped and ultimately assassinated. So it's a wild story. And I think my favorite summary of these isms is a moment in Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat in which President Eisenhower says, gosh, we sure do not get in the middle of foreign affairs and assassinate foreign officials on behalf of corporate interests of the US and its allies. And then it just cuts immediately to like the CIA director who is asked, so who gave the order to assassinate Patrice Lumumba, the prime minister of the Congo? And he's like, oh, President Eisenhower gave the order.
So beyond the fact that Tent Partnership is a bunch of international corporations trying to solve the refugee crisis that they in part caused by, well, exploiting refugee labor, there are even more pernicious aspects when we get into the details, as this article by Jacobin points out. First of all, many of the other companies in the Tent Partnership are simultaneously involved in a violently anti-immigrant policy. We're talking donations to the Republican Party, labor rights and safety violations, human rights violations, exploitation of migrants who are uniquely vulnerable to being forced into labor due to the threat of deportation, which it just so happens is facilitated by Tent Partnership members, Amazon and Microsoft. Oh, or excuse me, they're third-party vendors who are in contract with ICE for a $100 million cloud deal. This is a content warning. I'm going to be talking about ICE and showing footage from some of their operations. So heads up if that is not something you want to engage with. I will add a time code that you can skip to now. Oh, ICE. You family separation, forced sterilization, sexual abuse, and kidnapping Gestapo wing of the Department of Homeland Security. How we've come to know you well. I was going to make a satirical expansion of the ICE acronym here to allude to their various human rights abuses, but I realize there's two problems with that. One, there aren't nearly enough letters in ICE, and two, when you Google ICE human rights violations in January of 2025, what comes up is about a 50-50 split between human rights abuses committed by ICE, obviously, and on the other hand, Homeland Security investigations. To which you might ask, what is Homeland Security investigations? Well, I'm glad you asked. Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, is the division of ICE tasked with investigating violations of human rights. But look, they got a score of 9.7 on diversity on Zippia the Career Expert. That's what I was going to say when I wrote this in 2024 during the Biden administration. But since then, ICE's surely admirable human rights program has apparently been shelved and is not reflective of current practice. Though in their zeal to distance themselves from previous administrations, Trump 2.0's ICE added a similar notice to this article from 2018, which intentionally or unintentionally does make it look like ICE was celebrating 15 years of human rights violators and war crimes. And I can't imagine why the current administration wouldn't be loud and proud about their continued commitment to this long and storied American tradition. And since we're on the topic of ICE, I am absolutely remiss if I talk about state violence without talking about people resisting state violence and taking care of one another. So I super highly recommend this podcast on cool people who did cool stuff. There are a couple of hosts who went down to Minnesota and talked to people on the ground there. They've got a lot of great reflections on what we can learn from communities who are resisting ICE in the Twin Cities. So definitely check that out. I will leave a link in the description. Lots of resources there. Okay, we were talking about a yogurt commercial. How did we get here? Well, just as a reminder, we were talking about the Tent Partnership, which was founded by CEO of Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya, in order to facilitate
the economic integration of refugees into the global workforce. And members of the Tent Partnership are companies like, Amazon, who are providers of cloud services to military and ICE. Okay, I wanted this video to be as accurate as possible at time of recording. So to be fair, I wanted to search, see if Hamdi has said anything about ICE since the second Trump administration has been in office. And indeed, he gave an interview to the Wall Street Journal talking about immigrants and refugees, but, he just doubles down on all the same stuff about immigrants being essentially worthwhile because they contribute to the economy and,
Historically, U.S. received 80 to 125,000 refugees from all around the world, vetted by the State Department and settled all across the country. And they have right to work, and we lean in to say how we can take it from the communities and make them part of workforce. And that's what we did at Chobani.
Not once does he mention ICE, not once does he mention human rights violations other than vaguely gesturing at the Geneva Convention, so, not great. And even when he's asked point blank, are you working to influence immigration policy? Hamdi just says something vague about bipartisanship.
Are you working to influence immigration policy at all?
I think that the realistic bipartisan way of looking at things is extremely needed in this country.
And that is a dodge that I suppose makes sense if you remember he is on the Advisory Council for the Department of Homeland Security, so I doubt he could be terribly critical in a public setting. I really want to be done talking about the ruling class. I don't like spending this much time. Look, has Hamdi done some good stuff for the world? Sure. I think it's great that he's talking about refugees and stuff like that. He's a refugee himself. He said he left Turkey because he was serious about Kurdish rights, and hey, me too. I honestly find some of the most inspiring people in the world to be ones who started the Kurdish-led Rojava Revolution in northeast Syria. This multi-ethnic, multi-religious experiment in autonomous direct democracy with women's liberation at its very center, which has held territory in northeast Syria since 2011. Rojava is the Kurdish word for this region, but they changed their name to officially go by the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, just so as not to prioritize Kurdish over other languages in official communications, to recognize and celebrate the wild and beautiful diversity of this region. That's the level of inclusion we were talking about. This is a really hard section to record. When I wrote this, Rojava was considered an ally of the US to defend against ISIS in the region, but as of 2026, the US government has allowed the forces of the new Syrian regime to get away with a series of massacres against minorities and the forces of Turkey to invade, resulting in rampant violence against everyone who made up the revolution and the loss of nearly all of their autonomously governed territories. At time of recording, the last people of the revolution are under siege in the city of Chobani, and a number of high-profile leftist intellectuals have urged the US to step in and defend Rojava. To my knowledge, Hamdi has never expressed support for the Kurdish freedom movement in the region.
I come down to one reality. One reality is it's all about people. I think leaders need to understand between being friendly and befriend. I love my people, but I am still, how should I say? I'm still the founder. I'm still the CEO.
So to summarize, Hamdi wants to center caring about people, but only insofar as it's good business. God, why does that sound so familiar?
And remember, a business is only as good as its people. So treat them well.
So let's summarize what we know about this yogurt ad of ours. Chobani engages the Line Studios in East London to develop their humanitarian capitalist vision of the future into an advertisement. They bring on Studio Ghibli composer Joe Hisaishi to do the music. The animators bring in the aesthetic seed that concept artist Jessica Wolf won as the grand prize for the Adam Hawk Solarpunk art competition back in 2019. Then Chobani Marketing provides the voiceover, laying it all out in 91 words. And thus, we have our central text, Solarpunk Chobani. So did the ad work? Well, it clearly worked for this person, but I would say most of the commenters found the ad part of the ad fairly distasteful. But hey, YouTube commenters are not representative of the general public, so let's try to answer this in a more instrumental way. Was it a successful revenue driver for Chobani? The answer to this should probably factor into whether or not we think it's punk and what its limitations might be. I wanted to figure out if the virality of our Dear Alice affected Chobani's stock price, but I learned Chobani is not a publicly listed company. You can't buy or sell Chobani shares as a member of the general public. So don't worry, I'm only going to bore you for about 2 minutes, which you can skip if you already know what an IPO is. So, turns out Chobani has been trying to IPO for several years now, and just judging by when the ad came out, they were probably making it as part of a pre-IPO marketing campaign. So, for those who don't know, IPO is initial public offering. It's when a company's stock is listed on a public stock exchange for the first time. So, what you tend to hear about when companies decide to IPO is whether they succeeded or failed. What happens is really the amount of money that venture capital has been saying your company is worth, like, oh, we got a $3 billion valuation. Well, that gets a cold splash of, well, I was gonna say reality, but I mean, like, it's the stock market, so it's not really reality. But it gets a cold splash of something. Quite often, if you hear about a failed IPO, the stock just goes directly into the toilet. Something like Uber or WeWork, this happens. But, you know, of course, the executives of those companies never seem to end up actually having to pay for all of this money that's vanished. They just walk away with millions. But anyway, back on topic. Before you IPO generally, you want to make sure that your company has a really good public image. You know, that it's profitable, seems with the times, that sort of thing. Chobani actually went as far as to file an IPO. And in fact, Stephanie at Chobani, who you may remember from earlier in this video, actually wanted to remove from the Wikipedia page for Chobani that they had attempted to file one. So, you know what happened? Why didn't this beloved ad launch Chobani into the IPO Hall of Fame? Why didn't they continue their campaign and roll out a whole slew of these ads? And look, I could go into the ins and outs of corporate IPO strategy, market conditions, geopolitics, and end up with a very rational sounding, evidence-based conclusion. But you know, using math in your explanation and invoking the rhetoric of economics doesn't actually make your claims true, because math equations actually bake in a lot of assumptions about the world and people. Not only would that explanation be quite boring, I don't think actually any of these articles are any more insightful than the argument I want to make based on vibes and correlations. Okay, so the other 3 ads in this marketing campaign aren't actually secret, but practically speaking, when one of your ads has almost 1 million views and another has 25,000 and yet another 9,000 and finally a final paltry 3,000, the latter 3 are functionally invisible. I'm gonna totally jinx this video. Mine is gonna get like 300 views. Let's have a look at this second ad and see if we can't figure out why it didn't hit like the first.
Growing oats uses less water today, so we can enjoy the future tomorrow. Delicious, creamy, Chobani zero sugar oat milk.
Well, we might notice there's some subtle difference in the framing of these 2 ads. Yes, to be fair, one is much shorter than the other, so arguably they need to get to the point more quickly. But in doing so, in inverting the temporal order of the future and the incorporation of the product, they've skipped over the part where they get me to buy into the idea of a utopian world and then incorporate the product into it, and instead visually imply that drinking oat milk will lead directly to utopia. This is obviously going to turn off most people who are generally anti-commercial, but also people who drink oat milk for kind of the reason that this ad is implying, like for the environment. That's gonna make them feel quite foolish, as if they, like Chobani, had an unimaginably disproportionate sense of their own milk choices' impact on the world. And the third illegitimate stepchild YouTube video is a perfect encapsulation of what I've been describing.
Imagine a world where oat milk is creamy and delicious. Chobani oat.
What's their version of an optimistic future? Imagine a world in which oat milk was creamy and delicious. Vive la révolution! In Eat Today, Feed Tomorrow, Chobani tried to encode a humanitarian capitalist message using a combination of intertextual signifiers and invoking beloved and idyllic films, with voiceover expressing the CEO's business philosophy, which the media at large is usually just thrilled to eat up, but in this case, the dissonance between the intended message and what was on display was just simply too great, so the people rejected it. They removed all signs of Chobani from the Chobani ad. And what is that if not inspiring? In Hamdi's interview, we saw a lack of interest in imagining a future without wars of imperialism that create refugee crises, or imagining one in which workers collectively own the means of production and aren't exploited by CEOs. Solarpunk asks us to imagine a world based on fundamentally different social relations, different values. You can't really do an authentic representation of it while also successfully encouraging people to participate in capitalism. The only one of these ads that actually connected with people was the one that was most Solarpunk, authentically. But of course, it was also the one where the advertising felt so out of place that people just completely excised it and made their own decommodified versions. Fisher. Yeah, when you quote Mark Fisher.
To quote Mark Fisher in Capitalist Realism, what we are dealing with now is not the incorporation of materials that previously seemed to possess subversive potentials, but instead their pre-corporation, the preemptive formatting and shaping of desires, aspirations, and hopes by capitalist culture. That's what scares me about depicting futures like this. That it's limiting our imaginative horizon. I found this other blog post that goes a little bit further into it. Alessandro Spodoni says, in other words, Dear Alice is the pre-commodification of its ad-free remake. The revolution is already ended. It is already the antithesis to another thesis of the Solarpunk Manifesto. The punk in Solarpunk is about rebellion, counterculture, post-capitalism, decolonialism, and enthusiasm. It is about going in a different direction than the mainstream, which is increasingly going in a scary direction. Capitalism is the end of the world. Damn.
Yeah. So, essentially they're saying that even the version that the people reappropriated and took all the logos out of and all the voiceover, there's no more business as good as its people nonsense, even that is tainted by capitalist culture. And the fact that people like the decommodified version better is just a sign that people are happy to glom onto anything that has already been neutralized of its revolutionary potential from its initial conception. Yeah. But who's to police what does and does not have revolutionary potential? I mean, everything gets incorporated into the mainstream in some sense. You know what? Here, hand me that. Okay. There you go, there. Thank you. If you get to quote Mark Fisher, I get to quote David Graeber. There's this essay, The Shock of Victory, where he kind of talks about how leftists don't celebrate our wins. And he goes, the flip side of the old idea of the clean break, the one moment when the state falls and capitalism is defeated, is that anything short of that is not really victory at all.
If capitalism is left standing, if it begins to market your once subversive ideas, it shows that the capitalists really won. You've lost, you've been co-opted. To me, this is absurd. Can we say that feminism lost, that it achieved nothing just because corporate culture felt obliged to pay lip service to condemning sexism and capitalist firms begin marketing feminist books, movies, and other products? Of course not. Unless you've managed to destroy capitalism and patriarchy in one fell blow, this is one of the clearest signs that you've gotten somewhere. Presumably, any effective road to revolution will involve endless moments of co-optation, endless victorious campaigns, endless little insurrectionary moments or moments of flight and covert autonomy. I hesitate to even speculate what it might really be like. But to start in that direction, the first thing we need to do is recognize that we do, in fact, win some. Even if solarpunk as a genre gets mainstream success, like cyberpunk, or even if it's falling short of its radical roots, I think that could still be a small win. Rebecca Solnit talks about how we get used to monumental changes, and desires for freedom seem far-fetched until one day they seem inevitable. And people so clearly want to live in a world like this. I mean, just look at the comments. And far from pre-corporation, I think you could look at the decommodified ad as a rejection of incorporation. In taking it back, they've created a little more space for us to all play in our collective revolutionary imaginations. Alright, I still think it encodes some colonialist ideas. And I have issues with the robots. I hear you. But people aren't completely oblivious to this stuff. Did you see the decommodified version of the orange picking scene?
So far, we've seen a lot of solarpunk projects struggle commercially. And that's not to say that they never get funded, sometimes they do, but I would argue that they're never gonna do as well as art that doesn't challenge the dominant culture and power structures. Like Love, Becky Chambers' Monk and Robot duology winning the Hugo Award. But, you know, Colleen Hoover novels consistently top the New York Times bestseller list. Though, also books by indigenous scientists like Robin Wall Kimmerer also consistently top that list, so I find that personally very encouraging. But what about art that is extremely commercially successful, but also challenges the dominant power structures under which it was created? What would something like that look like? I wonder. Okay, if you made it this far, my goodness, thank you so much for watching this extremely long video. It's taken me like more than 2 years to do because I have another job / organizing and friends and other things in my life. Obviously, I made this like 10 times as complicated as it needed to be, but I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it, had a fun time or learned something. I would love to make more of these, so if you like them, you know, let me know, but also I'm going to make more of them anyway, so, you know, you can share what you feel like sharing, you know, it's up to you. Woo! Hey, buddy, come here, come here. We can say goodbye together, okay? Yeah. Oh, good, buddy. Hey, Emma, go say goodbye, buddy. He's not amused. Okay, bye-bye.